Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker. It's a Friday night and I'm joined by Aaron Bastani. Aaron, how are you joining me?
I'm very good, Michael. People won't be that familiar with the setup of my front room here, but just through this window I have my daughter shouting, "It's Dada." So if you can hear some ambient noise, Michael, please rest assured it's not entirely down to my lack of professionalism. It's also my little baby saying, "It's Dada."
It's Dada. How much can your daughter say nowadays? Can she do a sentence?
So I think
can
by
hear her.
two, they have... Yeah, there you go. So by about two, they can say 50 to 100 words. And at one, it's about 5 words max. I think now she's probably around 25, 30. She can say, she's really into bubbles at the moment. And also she says "at" when she's trying to say cat. Is that a word? I mean, I'll let our viewers decide.
At Aaron John Bastani on Twitter. She's already thinking in social media terms. What are we talking about tonight? Later in the show, we are going to be discussing why I need glasses, and also there's slightly more to it than that, as you'll see. And we're also going to discuss Steve Bannon and Elon Musk at CPAC, and sort of Musk's. I mean, what can we say about Elon Musk? I mean, there's many terrible things to say about him, but some issues with his family that put him in a even worse light than he might otherwise have been in. As you know, this show is only possible because of Novara Media supporters. If you aren't one already, do please go, or do consider going, I should say, to novaramedia.com/support. Straight into our first story, though. There are many things to worry about in 2025, but politically, the scariest might be this. The taboo around Nazism, which has existed since the Second World War, appears to be breaking. Ever since Elon Musk bought Twitter, the amount of outright white supremacy anyone can see on X has exploded. Musk himself has famously given a Nazi salute, and former Trump advisor Steve Bannon appeared to repeat the gesture at CPAC this week.
We're not going to retreat. We're not going to surrender. We're not going to quit. Fight, fight, fight. Amen.
Now, is he doing that because he's a Nazi, or is he doing that as some sort of edgelord play because he wants attention? I mean, I think probably the latter, but either way, it's incredibly worrying, right? There has been a Nazi taboo for very good reason, right? The idea of any kind of action that can associate oneself with Nazi Germany has for very good reason sort of been considered the worst slur you can throw at anyone. If you sort of compare someone to Nazi Germany, that's seen as offensive because everyone accepts that Nazi Germany was horrific. Millions and millions of people were killed, 6 million Jews. But now either we have political leaders, well, he's not so much political leader, but influential political figures who are overtly Nazis or who are sort of willing to flirt with the symbols of Nazism. It's dangerous. It's worrying. The Nazi taboo as well, as one might imagine, has for good reason been strongest in Germany, which is why this weekend's election is especially worrying. The Alternative for Deutschland are currently on 20% of the vote, double what they achieved last time around, and second to centre-right, the centre-right CDU, who are on 30%. You can see the SPD and the Greens in third and fourth place, the current governing parties. The AfD is, in multiple German states, classed as an extremist party. Its lead candidate in the state of Thuringia has been found guilty twice of using Nazi slogans. The slogan in question was "Everything for Germany," or "Alles für Deutschland." Alles für Deutschland was the slogan of the Nazi paramilitary group, the SA, and its use is therefore banned in Germany. But AfD supporters have found a way around that ban. The party's lead candidate is called Alice Weidel, and at rallies, supporters have begun shouting "Alles für Deutschland" instead of "Alles für Deutschland." Weidel herself, is a lesbian with a Sri Lankan partner, and has tried to present a more moderate image of herself than some of her party colleagues have. But her message is still very uncompromising.
We stepped up to save Germany, our homeland. And we will say this to the whole world. German borders are closed.
In an interview with Channel 4 News, another party representative of the AfD also made clear their policies would not stop at closing borders.
We will remove hundreds of thousands of people. We expect them to leave on their own.
Well, they may not want to leave. This is their home now.
No, it's not. They came here applying for asylum because there was a war in their home country. When the war is over, they have to leave. And if they don't leave deliberately, voluntarily basis, we have to force them out. Yeah.
The AfD's rise comes, as far-right politics often does, in the midst of an economic crisis. The German economy has not grown for the last 3 years, and its industry was hit especially hard when the Ukraine war cut off its supply of Russian gas. The German economy particularly reliant on Russian gas. More recent tragic events, though, have also been helpful in putting the wind under the AfD's sails. So in late December last year, an attack on a Christmas market in Magdeburg killed 6 people. To those opposed to immigration, the fact the driver supported the AfD and hated Islam was seen as less important than the fact he was from Saudi Arabia. Then in January, an Afghan man was arrested after a knife attack which killed 2 people, including a toddler. And last Friday, just 9 days before the election, this happened.
Some breaking news. A vehicle has driven into a crowd of people in the southern German city of Munich. At least 28 have been injured. 2 are seriously injured. Armed police rushed to the scene, as did paramedics and emergency crews. Officials say the incident appears to have been an attack. The suspect is now under arrest. Police say they believe him to be a 24-year-old Afghan asylum seeker.
The AfD, as you would imagine, wasted no time in instrumentalizing those attacks to demonize millions of law-abiding minorities. But they came at a time when Germans had already shifted their position on immigration, in particular asylum. Now, you might remember that once upon a time, Germany seemed to be the great hope when it came to Europe as a continent welcoming of refugees. And in 2015, when Angela Merkel opened the country to Syrian refugees, they were welcomed at train stations. So in total, Germany received over 1 million refugees in 2015 alone. That was half of all the refugees accepted by the whole of Europe. So it was still, I think, an incredibly brave move by Angela Merkel. And Germany has continued to be more welcoming than most European countries. For example, in 2023, a total of 334,000 asylum applications were made in the country, a third of all applications made in the EU. And 3.4 million people in Germany currently have a refugee background. So I do still think that was a sort of significant achievement of Angela Merkel in terms of saying we can manage. And then while she was still in charge, I mean, they did manage, right? Public opinion, though, has hardened. In the latest polling, 68% of the public said the country should take in fewer refugees, and major parties have also followed suit. This was the CDU's candidate for Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, speaking at a debate this week.
We have to solve 2 major problems in this country in the next 4 years. That is migration and the economy. If we don't solve these 2 problems, then you and we and all democratic parties in the political centre will not be in the running for the next change of government in the 2029 federal elections. We will finally slide into right-wing populism. And I am standing here to avoid exactly that.
For analysis of Sunday's election, I spoke to 2 guests. So second, you'll hear from a social worker who came to Germany in 2015 as a Syrian refugee. First, though, this is writer and historian Katja Hoyer. Katja's most recent book, Beyond the Wall, gave an account of life in East Germany, where she grew up. It was the topic of a great interview she did for Downstream back in 2023. For now, though, in our conversation, I started by asking Katja to lay out what she thought was the big story of this election.
The biggest thing that I certainly hear from German voters is a sense that they want change, and they don't really know how to vote to make that happen. There seems to be a bit of a sense of frustration that kind of whatever you vote, you're going to get similar type of politics back compared to what Germany has been used to for the last few sort of years, if not decades. So that seems to be the biggest thing. Any new government coming in will have to deliver change if they want to kind of get the trust of German voters back.
I mean, something that's really extraordinary about Germany at the moment is it hasn't had any growth whatsoever for over 2 years. Now, obviously, internationally, especially, this election is being viewed through the lens of the far right and especially immigration. Should we be thinking more in terms of the economy here?
Well, they are both big factors, both in surveys as well as kind of what politicians are saying and what the election campaign has been fought on. Because you're right, the stagnation is really kind of acutely felt by people, both in terms of just the cost of living and the social impact that it has, but also because in Germany it goes really quite deep to the the national psyche, if you will. So the idea that Germany is always going to be a prosperous, large economy that delivers for all social classes is at the heart of what post-war Germany, and certainly in terms of the West German ethos, what it is. And that promise doesn't seem to be there anymore. And that's, I think, a big factor in why people are so unhappy.
You're a historian of modern German history. So let's talk about this election in historical perspective. Obviously, people are unnerved at the fact that a far-right party is doing well in Germany. We haven't been used to that being the case, of course, since the Nazis. How should we put this election in historical perspective?
It's more obvious now than it's ever been because there is a far-right party that is doing well. I think the same sorts of sentiments that are feeding into the AfD vote today, though, have been around for a long time. It's just that the conservative parties were able to absorb that in the past. And I think what's happened in recent years is that vote is kind of split into those that have stuck with the with the Conservative Party and those who've gone to the AfD instead. And it's not that these sentiments kind of come out of nowhere. They've been around for a long time. So if you want to go back all the way to post-war Germany, where that consensus of not having a far-right party kind of originates in the 50s and 60s, then you'll see that not only is the Conservative Party far more to the right than it is currently, very staunchly conservative in terms of the way it views women, for example, family policy, those sorts of things. And on top of that, they basically incorporated, whenever there were far-right movement, at the time even outright neo-Nazi movements emerging, they were basically pulled into the fold of the conservative movement. And I think that's what stopped. It's kind of just a kind of externalization, if you will, of the right wing of conservatism that we see today.
Let's talk about the politics of migration in Germany. So obviously, back in 2015, Germany was seen as the vision of welcomingness in Europe. A lot seems to have changed. Obviously, the AfD gaining support. The CDU, I think, have said they want to end Schengen, so free movement within Europe, just to sort of stop refugees and asylum seekers entering the country. The SPD sort of talking about how they've increased deportations. Is this a sort of unstoppable shift towards a more anti-migrant or more restrictionist position among German politicians?
If we go back to 2015, and as you say, there was this kind of widespread Willkommenkultur, as it was called at the time, so welcoming culture towards refugees. But even then, there was quite vocal opposition to that within the Conservative Party itself, challenging Angela Merkel, who was at the helm of it. And also in wider society, that's effectively what made the AfD turn from quite a small libertarian party that it was in 2013 when it was founded, into a much, much bigger movement that it became, because effectively people who were critical towards the immigration that was happening since 2015 couldn't stick with the Conservative Party under Angela Merkel, because effectively she was for that policy. So that's why it opened up that gap on the right. So in lots of ways, it's now a realization, I think, of the mainstream parties that some of their voters feel the same way, and they want to try and retain those rather than losing even more people to the AfD. Because people always imagine it's just conservative voters that are going that way, but the SPD, the centre-left party, has also lost a lot of voters to the AfD for the same reasons. Most surveys seem to indicate that about 2/3 or so of the German public want more restrictive immigration measures, and at the moment you have about 1/5 of voters going to the AfD. So there's a big gap there, and I think the mainstream parties are worried that they might lose even more people if they don't do anything about that, because it is a big ask, even for a wealthy, large state like Germany, in terms of welfare spending, in terms of resources, in terms of house prices, GP appointments, all the same things that are issues in other countries as well. And that's why especially working class voters have been drawn to the AfD, because they see the impact of that on the ground much more than sort of middle and upper class voters.
Obviously, the left is very divided on how to respond to the rise of the far right, and I suppose people being very concerned about immigration. Now, on the one side, there's one section of sort of progressive thought that says what you've got to do is absolutely give this kind of politics no time. Say migration isn't the issue. Talk about different issues, the economy, inequality, for example. There's another part of the left, or I suppose depending on how you want to define it, which says what you need to do to defeat far-right parties is to be economically left-wing while being somewhat conservative on the sort of social dimension. Now, in Germany, there is a political party, which some people say the blue Labour types have been excited about, which is the Sarah Wagenknecht party. She had very much this sort of strategy of saying, let's be economically left-wing, socially more conservative. Last year, it looked like she was doing quite well. She was about 9% in the polls when she just launched her party. Now she's down to 4% though. So does that show the limits of that kind of strategy?
I think partially it's a very German internal issue in the sense that she kind of grew up in East Germany and is kind of seen as an East German figure, which in itself makes it difficult for her to break into the West German mainstream, which is the vast majority of Germans. East Germans only make up about sort of 18, 19%. So that was always going to be tricky for someone who's so intensely associated with kind of East German socialism. And then I think the second issue is that in contrast to similar movements elsewhere, so when you look at the Scandinavian social democratic parties, for example, they've gone down a similar route, or Blue Labour in the UK. But in contrast to those, she's very, very focused on the war in Ukraine and the relationship with Russia. And that doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with the kind of left-wing conservatism that you just described. So if I'm a worker in Germany and I want kind of less immigration but more stability, in terms of my work conditions or my pay, it doesn't necessarily mean at the same time that I want Russia appeased or I want Germany to sort of dance to the Russian tune, as it were. And so I've certainly spoken to lots of voters, even in the East, who say that they find this very idiosyncratic mix of things difficult, because they may agree with some of it but not the other. It's kind of very tailored around the leader, Sarah Wagenknecht, after whom the party is named as well, and you have to sort of agree on all of these things that she thinks in order for this to be your party. So I think that's what's happened to it. It also comes across, to be fair, as quite a sort of negative, grumpy party, for lack of a word, one that kind of thrives on the frustrations of people, and that isn't necessarily the sort of optimism or upbeat tone that a lot of voters also crave. They want to look forward, and there's an argument there that the other left-wing party, Die Linke, is currently better at catering to that.
Obviously, the AfD have had some loud, noisy, controversial support from the likes of Elon Musk and J.D. Vance. How has that gone down in Germany?
That depends who you ask. I mean, there's been a lot of outrage about it from the AfD's opponents. Within the AfD, obviously, they were, I think, quite pleased with the opportunity to present themselves as a mainstream party that is just being sort of branded or tarnished by the political mainstream that's kind of lashing out at them. So it does completely depend on who you ask, whether they are an AfD supporter or not. I think what is interesting about that is that the AfD actually has a very, very strong anti-American streak in it. So if you look at the manifesto, it actually says that the party feels that the interests of Germany and the US are increasingly diverging, is the phrase that is used in there, and that Russia is seen as the reliable economic partner, particularly on energy. So they now had to bridge this gap between that and kind of taking the support that they're getting from Elon Musk. And that's been an interesting thing to watch, because I think Alice Weidel, the leader of the AfD, is quite happy to do that, because her focus is actually largely as a libertarian. She's largely aligned with Musk there on economic issues. But if you kind of go deeper down in the party to its grassroots, it's much, much more of an anti-immigration party, and also one that thinks the energy policy that Germany's been following since the war in Ukraine is wrong, and they basically want relations restored with Russia, which would of course go entirely in another direction. So it's a complicated picture there. I think they've just taken the opportunity to get a bigger platform and to make an international case for their party.
And what about the overtures that Trump is making towards Vladimir Putin in this election? How's that affecting it, if at all? I mean, is this potentially helping the more centrist parties? If people are feeling motivated, to feel confrontational to the kind of politics that Donald Trump represents?
It makes the situation that German politicians are in extremely complicated. Some are even talking about a new two-front war, kind of alluding to the central position that Germany has in Europe and the kind of headache that's caused the country, in the First and the Second World War, in the sense that it's once again kind of wedged between two powers that it now feels, have interests that diverge from Germany. So in the past, most German kind of intellectuals, politicians, public figures tend to fall into one bracket or another. They either look west towards the US as the big partner, or they look east towards Russia. And now that both of these things have become incredibly complicated because of the stance that Trump's taken, particularly towards Ukraine, and the war there, and the way that Germany has been criticized by both of those states, heavily for its stance. So in a way, it makes it very difficult if you're a German who's previously been a transatlanticist and you're looking west and you're saying that involves support for Ukraine, being a Western-looking German. And then suddenly Trump's saying something very different, and it puts you in this, awkward position where your Western orientation is suddenly becoming a much more complicated thing than it was in the past.
That was Katja Hoyer speaking to me earlier. We got a super chat from Philip Scott. Katja Hoyer's book is profound. Thanks to Novara Media for recommending it to me. I have to admit, it's still on my reading list, but I did really, really enjoy her conversation with Aaron Bastani. Such interesting sort of facts. One that really sticks in my mind was concerned Vietnamese coffee, but you'll have to go to the video to find out what I might be talking about. That'd be Katja Hoyer on Downstream. I'll go to my next guest in one moment. Before that, though, I want to make one important point, which is that while Germans in general are becoming more hostile to migration, as has been sort of explained at the top of the show, this shift is being resisted. So 2 weeks ago, 200,000 people came out to demonstrate against the far right in Munich. That was following the politicization by the right of an attack by the Afghan migrant, or an Afghan migrant, that killed 2 people in the city. And there have also been large protests in Berlin, Hamburg, and other major cities. Of course, this political contest between two sides, or those pro-migrant, those anti-migrant, it's about real people, right? And the tone of the debate can't be easy for Germany's over 3 million refugees, or people of refugee background. Earlier today, I spoke to Jamil Al-You, who fled Syria in 2015 and has lived in Dortmund ever since. He's a social worker and a member of the German Refugee Advisory Board. And I began by asking him how the election is affecting him and his community.
It's a scary situation. We can't dance our way around it. We have to be clear about the fact that we are moving in a very worrying direction. We do have a rising in right-wing politics and narratives. This is clear, but we also have a steady rise from the other side of the political spectrum. I do believe that German politicians are not learning from the past experience of other countries, such the UK and other European countries. But I do believe that the German people are trying to resustain the values, the European values that they showed in 2015.
As I understand, you arrived in Germany in 2015 at the height of the refugee crisis. Could you just tell us sort of how that was? Did you find Germany a welcoming place? Was it sort of easy enough to set up your life there? Was it challenging?
It wasn't easy. There were times where we were faced with systematic racism in different government structures, but also day-to-day racism on the street from individuals. That being said, I do believe that Germany still have the atmosphere of welcoming migrants and refugees. I think Germany is a country that needs to stay open to migration, as well as other European countries. What is not being concentrated on is the value of migrants in nurturing the society and the economy, in helping the society grow. That is being used by mainstream politicians right now to spread fear instead of spreading awareness about these facts.
Obviously, Germany is in a difficult situation economically, politically at the moment. And there are obviously political parties, the AfD, the CDU as well, who are trying to say that migration is to blame for lots of that. They'll say that the housing crisis, the infrastructure crisis, stagnant wages, etc. They'll connect that with migration. How would you respond to that?
Let's be honest about it. The AfD is not providing any solutions. They are just trying to state a problem that isn't really there. They are trying to say the migrants are the major issue, but they are not offering any solutions to help the infrastructure in the country. We do need to invest in building more houses. We do need to invest in the health sector, and we do need to start recognizing the skills and expertise of migrants working in the health sector. As for example, we don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough nurses. This is due to the fact that the bureaucratical barriers being put in the system are not allowing new working power to be integrated in the work market. On the one side, we are saying migrants are the problem, but on the other side, we are not using them as a solution. So for me, the solution would be investing in migration correctly, investing in implementing and integrating working forces in the working market, and trying to raise awareness about the fact that migration is not a problem.
And finally, obviously, the situation in Syria has changed dramatically in the past few months. So Assad has fallen, he's been replaced. How have those developments been received among the Syrian community in Germany?
We were quite happy that Assad left. We were joyful. We were partying and celebrating in the streets. But we were clear about one thing. Jolani will stay Jolani until he gets due process to answer about things he did in Idlib in 2017 and other periods. We are cautious about what will happen next. We do want a democratic transfer. We do want to have freedom of expression in the country. We will see what the days ahead have for us, but I think many Syrians are trying to give as possible for Syria, trying to work towards building the country again. So for Syrians in Germany, this means they will need to come to a conclusion. Do I go to Syria and help inland, or do I stay in the diaspora and help from there? I think right now we cannot talk about a safe return to Syria. We can't talk about Syrian refugees going back to Syria, because the country is not stable right now. We don't have an infrastructure. We still have many issues and challenges to face. But after we face them, after we abolish the reasons of refuge, then we can talk about a safe return, and we can talk about numbers of Syrians building the country from inside.
That was Jamil Al-You. Aaron, I want to bring you in on this. The politics of migration, right-wing populism in Europe, such a huge issue facing, so many places at the moment. Le Pen, I was looking today, she seems to be sort of odds on to be the next president of France. The AfD probably won't win. They're not going to win on Sunday. They'll come second. But it's quite possible that they could come first in 2029, especially if they are what they are quite likely to be, which is the main opposition in Germany. Obviously, that's an advantageous position to be in if the next government's not going to be particularly successful. How big is this story when it comes to the politics of the right in Europe?
Well, it's huge. I'd also say in regards to the AfD, Michael, who knows, right? You've got polling showing the AfD on 20, the CDU on 29. Stranger things have happened that, the margin of error is overcome. CDU's out by 5, AfD. I personally don't think that, but, we have had stranger election results happen in the last decade. But I think you're right. The real task for them is going to be 2029 to become the overall largest party. Not just that, of course, by virtue of the electoral system that Germany has, they're going to have to defang this idea that they are outsiders, that is beyond the pale to work with them in coalition, because they can be the biggest party and by a significant amount without coalition partners, probably the CDU, maybe others as well. I can't see either of the two left parties doing it. Maybe the FPD, the centrist party. I can't really see the Greens either. But without a coalition partner of some kind, they simply won't form a government. So they're going to have to do two things. They're going to have to bump those polling numbers up and also remove some of that stigma around the AfD, which, of course, as an insurgency anti-establishment party, is going to be quite hard. And we see this a lot, don't we, with insurgency parties? They seem destined to reach the top, and actually to get over that final furlong is quite difficult. I think in the case of the AfD, they will do it, but it'll be very, very hard. Easy to say, much harder to do. In terms of the politics of migration, the salience of the politics of migration, I mean, it is enormous, but at the same time, we have seen enormous shifts over the last 10 years. And again, I think often the left isn't honest about the numbers involved. I think immigration is a net benefit, particularly for an aging society. But it's also true that repeatedly, and this is particularly from the centre-right, Michael, over the last 25 years, we've had politicians saying we will reduce immigration, and actually it goes to new unprecedented heights. So they have massive immigration, partly because of pragmatism. They have to staff, for instance, like in the UK, the NHS, our care services and whatnot, without actually saying that to the people that vote for them. You know, the Tories were voted in 2019. I don't think anybody thought that Boris Johnson, of all people, post-Brexit PM, was going to oversee a wave of immigration which saw net migration in 1 year of 900,000 people. And I say this a lot, the primary legacy of Brexit fundamentally is that Central and Eastern European workers who are coming to work in the UK in agricultural services, in front-facing consumer services, you know, you go to Pret-a-Manger, you meet lots of nice Hungarian, Polish, Slovakian people, etc. Those people have overwhelmingly been replaced by people from South Asia and elsewhere, but non-EU, non-white migrants. That is the principal legacy of Brexit. And the ironic thing is, this is exactly what Nigel Farage said that he wanted. He said he wanted fewer white European migrants doing these kinds of jobs, and he wanted more people from the Commonwealth, like Indians, like Pakistanis. Well, that's happened, and now he's railing against it. So I think the salience will continue, but at the same time, and I'd pose this question to you, Michael, it's hard to imagine we'll see a wave of migration, both undocumented or as a result of displacement, wars, etc., but also legal migration, or rather documented economic migration. It's hard to see either happening on the same scale we've seen over the last 10 years. I mean, Germany is the case in point. Was it 2015 or 2016? You have the exact numbers to hand. I think well over 1 million people were given asylum in Germany in that 1 year. And I think there was this series of very bad policy choices made by the West, led on by the Americans. It's almost like we have had a foreign policy of trying to displace as many people as possible in Europe's near abroad. That's true with regards to Iraq, with regards to Libya, with regards to Afghanistan, with regards to Iran even. You could go on and on and on. Now it's happening with Gaza. You have the exact same people saying that Palestinians shouldn't have a homeland. They can't have a country. And if they are displaced and they move, well, they can't have asylums. They can't have an asylum. They can't have a country. Let's be honest, you just want them all to die, right? That's the solution you're proposing. But I feel like it's going to be very hard, Michael, for foreign policy circles in Europe and the US to make as many stupid screw-ups in the next 25 years as the last 25 years. The war on terror displaced over 45 million people. All right? And if you look at the people who cross the channel, Iraqis, Syrians, Iranians, Afghans, these are the countries that have been in our crosshairs. And I say this time after time to the right, Michael, they really will not listen. For people that don't like refugees, you sure like making them. I mean, Iran is the case in point. You have sanctions on Iran, incredibly harsh sanctions, consciously designed, lab engineered to destroy and vanquish the Iranian economy. Iranians leave, and then people get upset. Why are they coming here? Well, what do you think is going to happen? You think people are just going to lie down and become opium addicts and say, okay, I've got a master's degree in microbiology, but I'm just going to give up because sanctions have basically destroyed my life, destroyed my country. Come on, be honest. So I kind of feel the macro level of bad foreign policy choices. It's hard to make as many screw-ups in the next 25 years as we have in the last 25 years. So I think it's a huge issue. I think it's going to become an even bigger issue. But maybe medium to long term, things shift. And I also do think there's going to have to be at least some recognition by the right, Michael, that as a result of demographic aging, declining fertility rates, just for the basic maintenance of things like an elderly care system, your national health service, etc., you're going to need some migration. Okay. And I think that's the conversation we have to have. Because you break it down and all of a sudden you find consent rather. Oh yeah, okay, well we can have 50,000 people working in elderly care. Okay, well we can have 50,000 people working in NHS. Okay, well if it's 50,000 people who help us build homes. Okay, well all of a sudden we're in the 100,000 again. 100, 200, 300, 400,000. Okay, we can have some people if they're going to go study at Russell Group universities. Okay, maybe the universities beyond that as well. Well, okay, where does it stop? So I do think at some point you will have a sensible conversation about that over the next 5 to 10 years. I think the sort of liberal default of all immigration is good, anybody who disagrees is racist, you're welcome to think that. It clearly hasn't worked. So I think there has to be a sensible conversation about bad foreign policy, people being displaced as a result of undocumented migration, and the need for migrants as a result of declining fertility rates and just to keep our societies ticking over. And if you want more kids and higher fertility rates and bigger families, you're probably going to have a lot more state intervention. That might bump things up somewhat, but it's probably not going to be everything, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the aging question means that we are going to continue to have a lot of migration, right? And I think, especially in Europe, the massive political debate is over asylum and refugees because, with economic migration, you get to choose who's coming, right? So you can sort of say, we've got this control, we've invited these people, we've given them visas. And with asylum and refugees, it's in a way more emotive because it's something that people can claim is imposed on them, even though, of course, you're giving people refuge when they're fleeing something awful. I don't quite share your confidence that sort of there will be fewer displaced people in the next 10 years than there were in the previous 10 years because I don't think, one, I wouldn't rule out stupid Western wars, but also I don't think you need a stupid Western war to create a lot of displaced people. Just look at Sudan for the moment. Obviously, I'm sure one can sort of come up with an explanation of what's going on in Sudan, which implicates the West somehow. But I think it's difficult to see how that was just a result of sort of silly Western foreign policy. What was interesting, something that I hadn't realized when I was researching this story is how different Germany is in a way to some of the other countries that accepted lots of people in 2015. So Sweden was the country which was actually on a per capita basis the most welcoming in 2015. I think they welcomed about 180,000 Syrians, which for a very small country of 10 million people is significant. They now accept basically zero refugees. So they had a sort of massive swing in their country to being much more conservative when it came to borders, and they've gone to zero. Germany still is, by a long stretch, letting in or inviting in or accepting the largest number of asylum seekers compared to any other country in Europe. So I think they still had 100,000 Syrians coming last year. So there is a sort of, I would imagine that Germany are going to go more in the direction of Sweden. Obviously for Europe as well, this will be very consequential because that will involve getting rid of Schengen. A big debate at the moment in Germany is whether to end Schengen, which is freedom of movement within Europe. Germany had usually been seen as one of the biggest defenders of that. They are now switching sides, it seems. There are already plenty of reasons to quit your smartphone. They shorten our attention spans, make us anxious, and if you go on Twitter or X, potentially irate. But one more reason has just dropped. You can see here, every hour children spend on screens raises chance of myopia. Study finds. Yes, smartphones make you need these. I've got to put them back on because I can't read the article, actually. This is from the report. It's in The Guardian. While genetics play a role in who develops myopia, which is short-sightedness, other factors that increase risk include not spending enough time outdoors and focusing on things that are close up for prolonged periods, which could explain why screen time has been associated with a higher risk and severity of myopia. Now, researchers in Korea say they have shed fresh light on this relationship in analysis of 45 studies involving over 300,000 participants that looked at the use of digital screen devices such as mobile phones, games consoles, and television. The results, largely based on data from children, adolescents, and young adults, reveal that an additional hour of screen time or daily screen time is on average associated with 21% higher odds of having myopia. And they go on to say this. The Korean team added that for those who already had the condition, an additional hour of daily screen time was associated with 54% higher odds of becoming even more short-sighted. When the researchers delved deeper, they found the risk of myopia rose steeply as daily screen time increased with 5% greater odds of myopia for 1 hour a day of exposure compared with no screen use, and 97% higher odds for 4 hours use a day. And beyond that duration, the researchers added the odds rose more slowly. while there was no clear association with myopia for screen use below 1 hour a day, suggesting a potential safety threshold. So if you look at your screen for under an hour, you're fine. If you look at it for over 4 hours, you might as well look at it for over 8 hours, because it seems like the differences sort of level off at that period of time. Aaron, on this topic about sight, I needed my glasses when I went to university, which I think was probably from looking at screens. They declined every year after that. I think until I got a dog, and now I go outside more and look into the distance. What do you make of this story?
Yeah, bang on the money, Michael. I mean, I basically needed glasses as a result of doing a PhD and just looking into a screen multiple hours a day. And not good, Michael. I do think we need something of a Butlerian jihad when it comes to these technologies. From a behavioral point of view for kids, a broadly social and emotional health point of view for everybody else. And eyes matter. I would submit, Michael, very humbly, that eye health is important, probably not as important as the emotional well-being of children or an epidemic of mental ill health amongst adults. But anyway, add it to the tally. I like to think that my eyes were perfect without screens. I have to say as well, I mean, every day I've basically got eye strain. Every single day. I'm not wearing my glasses now because it reflects the lights from my ring light, but I do need glasses. I'm blind as a bat. I can't see very much. And that basically kicks in after I was about 19, 20. And it gets really bad, like I said, with my PhD when I was around 30. But until then, I never needed them.
What does the phrase Butlerian jihad come from?
It comes from Dune, Michael, the science fiction book Dune.
But it's not in the film.
Distant future.
They didn't say that in the film, did they? They didn't say that in the film. I don't remember.
It's in the book. You should read the book, right. Michael. Yeah, the Butlerian jihad.
Films.
Or read the Wikipedia article if you want. Your favorite. Your favorite when you say being self-effacing. That's not me criticizing Michael. The Butlerian jihad is an event that precedes the Dune books, which are basically set tens of thousands of years in the future. The Butlerian jihad is an uprising against thinking machines. And there are some great quotes by Frank Herbert about the pitfalls of unthinking relations to technology in Dune, which I think in part is a meditation about our relationship to technology. I think we probably do need something of a Butlerian jihad against screens. Also, Michael, I mean, it's a small thing, right? Eye health, but also back health. People, it's a stupid line. Sitting is the new smoking. Obviously, that's just stupid. But the amount of time that people spend sitting down at screens every day for 40 hours a week for their working lives is not very good. So we need to rethink a lot of this stuff as a society, Michael. I mean, one answer, of course, is a 4-hour day. Maybe spend that other day doing nice outdoors activities. Bit of rewilding, spending time with the kids. Why not?
That's interesting. Butlerian jihad, you know what I always thought of whenever I heard it said, Aaron?
James Butler.
Not James Butler. You know that video that sort of goes viral every now and again where Judith Butler talks about how Hamas and Hezbollah are part of the global left, and then everyone says, ha, she's so stupid. Butlerian jihad just always brought that particular clip to mind. But obviously it's a very, very different thing from June. Interesting. Steve Bannon doing a Nazi salute might be the single most depressing thing that happened at CPAC. That's the conservative, or a conference for American conservatives. But this was perhaps the most embarrassing. This is Argentinian President Javier Milei handing Musk a chainsaw. And Musk then shouts this.
The chainsaw for bureaucracy. Chainsaw!
Chainsaw! Milei is, of course, fresh from being embroiled in a crypto scam that we discussed on Wednesday's show. The chainsaw represents his attempt to gut the Argentinian state, a project now being pursued by Musk, if only in a very haphazard fashion. He keeps ending cancer trials and obviously HIV treatment for people in sub-Saharan Africa. We've already talked about that. Musk also mentioned the other Trumpian obsession, the right to tell offensive jokes.
And have like a sense of humor, So, I mean, the sort of the left wanted to make comedy illegal, Like you can't make fun of anything. So there's like comedy sucks. It's like nothing's funny. You can't make fun of anything. It's like legalize comedy. Yeah. Legalize comedy.
And we've shifted the entire culture. That was something.
I am become meme. Yeah, pretty much.
Whenever we show you a clip of Donald Trump, it's very difficult not to laugh. However serious the story, like the way he expresses it is genuinely funny. Elon Musk is like a vacuum that sucks in humor. Like it's gross, really horrible. Well, really dull, really embarrassing, I suppose. Also, lots of people commenting on the fact that he's got these really dark glasses. Elsewhere in the interview, he was really struggling to speak, and he is known to be, a drug user. So, is he sort of taking an axe to America's, entire state funding system while on ketamine or something like that? You should be probably fairly worried if you're an American right now. Another dark element of this. While Musk was waving a chainsaw and trying to be funny, and failing, I think, the mother of 3 of his children was tweeting this. So Grimes, pop star, who was married to Elon Musk for a while, please respond about our child's medical crisis. I am so sorry to do this publicly, but it is no longer acceptable to ignore this situation. This requires immediate attention. If you don't want to talk to me, can you please designate or hire someone who can so that we can move forward on solving this? This is urgent, Elon. She goes on, I'm not giving any details, but he won't respond to texts, calls, or emails and has skipped every meeting, and our child will suffer lifelong impairment if he doesn't respond ASAP. So I need him to effing respond, and if I have to apply public pressure, then I guess that's where we are at. Aaron, I mean, what can you say to that? And this is a guy who always talks about family. I mean, he's a massive pronatalist, isn't he? He wants everyone to have loads of children, and then this is how he apparently fathers his child.
Well, there is something of a pattern here, isn't there? That pronatalists on the right tend not to actually be necessarily the best parents. Although I suppose is Boris Johnson pronatalist? I don't think so. I think he just had 7 or 8 or 9 kids because he likes having sex, actually, let's be honest. Elon Musk has, 13 now, apparently? Michael, people talk about the demographic decline of the West. These guys are giving it a damn good shot. 13 with Elon Musk, 7 or 8 or 9 with Boris Johnson, I think 4 with Farage, 7 with Mog? I've only got 1 kid. How are we going to keep up, Michael? We've got no chance. On a serious note, it is pretty bad. It's pretty extraordinary for somebody who is worth more than $350 billion to have a mother of their child publishing this stuff online. I mean, it's actually humiliating. If that was, it's a stupid thing to say. If I was the richest person in the world, but if you were, you'd imagine one of your parents or a sibling, somebody would say, "Look, this is really embarrassing. This is quite shameful. Actually, you should probably get on top of this. It looks really bad." Personally, I think there are a few things more shameful than being a neglectful parent. Personally, nobody made you have the kids, all right? So you probably should look after them. And of course, lots of relationships don't work out. Parents go different ways, but you need to do your best and get on for the sake of the kids. I say that as somebody whose parents didn't live together. So they weren't best friends most of the time. So it's pretty revolting, actually. Your point as well about the comedy is really interesting. I mean, we have so many clips of Trump played on this show, and almost always we're laughing because, okay, he is a very serious political figure, and many things he thinks, says, and does have major political implications, some of which are bad, some of which impact us here in the UK. But he's quite funny. It's quite captivating. That just doesn't apply with Musk. I mean, he's a complete moron. And I know that you and I disagree with quite a few people on the left because we don't think he's stupid. I think he's quite intelligent. But like anybody, Michael, who's successful and wealthy, I think he's also gotten quite lucky. That's true with anybody. That's not a criticism of him. I think to get to that level of politics or business or anything, you have to be a little bit lucky. And I think he's had that. But I think clearly he thinks he's ascended to some new level of human. The idea that you're taking a hacksaw to US government spending, trying to remove $2 trillion of spending whilst taking drugs and barely sleeping, sounds outlandish to me, but it's also quite a fitting way for US empire to end. And by the way, that is what we're seeing. We are seeing the end of US empire. The strange thing is it's being done by design. You had Marco Rubio, little Marco, as Secretary of State, Trump's Secretary of State, openly talking about multipolarity. US policy since 1945 has been unipolarity. That was the point of the Cold War. They're now talking about multipolarity quite openly. Just such a weird time, Michael. Multipolarity, and a dude that wrote a book which was adapted into a Netflix film talking to European politicians at Munich. And meanwhile, the world's wealthiest person is taking drugs, it seems, and trying to cut US government spending by $2 trillion. it does all feel like evidence that suggests we live in a simulation, Michael. It's more outlandish than one could possibly conceive in fiction. Although I think Pirandello, an Italian novelist, said precisely that. He said, facts are often or almost always more outlandish than fiction.
Yeah, I should caveat this by saying I don't know more details than reading these tweets, but from my interpretation of these tweets on the face of it, Aaron, it was kind of worse than him just being neglectful of the children, because I interpreted this as him kind of almost holding them hostage. I should be clearer. My interpretation of this was that Grimes, the children's mother, was not with the child. The child was in the care of Elon Musk at that time, and Grimes was worried that this child needed something and she couldn't access the child. So it seemed to me worse than just, obviously, neglect and sort of abandonment is bad, but this seemed almost more proactive than that, because it seemed like he'd kind of taken custody of the child and then wasn't doing what was needed to stop them getting a lifelong impairment. Maybe we'll learn more about this story in the future. For now, let's go on to a different angle of this. Elon Musk is Trump's current right-hand man. We've already mentioned that his former one gave a Nazi salute at CPAC.
And we're not going to retreat. We're not going to surrender. We're not going to quit. Fight, fight, fight. Amen.
Now, that was such an extreme thing to do that Jordan Bardella, he's a leader of the French National Rally, so their far-right party, has cancelled his planned speech to CPAC this weekend because he now thinks that the stain of Nazism hangs over the conference. And of course, Trump will still happily be attending on Saturday. Let's go to Bannon once more, though, because in his speech, he also said this.
The future of MAGA is Donald J. Trump. We want Trump in 28. That's what they can't stand. A man like Trump comes along only once or twice in a country's history, right? We want Trump. 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 We want Trump.
Now, I suppose one of the reassuring is the wrong word, but sort of one of the silver linings maybe of the Trump presidency is that it's difficult to see how you build the coalition Trump did without Trump's sort of, unique charisma, right? You'd imagine if Steve Bannon or someone stood for presidency and with exactly the same politics as Trump, they probably wouldn't win. And so therefore, the fact that Trump can't stand again in 2028, according to the American Constitution, was a bit of a relief. Lots of people now floating the idea that maybe he will stand for a third term. Is this, I suppose one interpretation of the two clips we've just shown is that Steve Bannon is desperate for attention, which is, I think, highly plausible. Do you think there is a danger, though, that we could end up with Trump sort of changing the Constitution or breaking the Constitution and standing for a third term?
You could change the Constitution. You're allowed to change the Constitution. FDR did 3 terms. You're allowed to change the Constitution. I suppose they could make it quite clean and say you can't serve more than 2 consecutive terms. But then, of course, so what he would run again in 2028, and maybe in 2032, you've got Steve Bannon ahead of 2032 saying, no, we need Trump to run again. He's going to, at some point, be too old to run. He's going to be will he be an octogenarian, I think, Michael, in 28? He's getting on now, right? He'll be close to 80 by then. I think he'll be over 80 by then.
He's 78 now.
Yeah. So he'll be 82 months away. He'll be 83 probably by the time of the next election. And then if you were to do a full term after that, you'll be 87. I can't see how you do more. Maybe, right? Maybe. He's a very wealthy man and it's a country with very advanced medical technology if you have enough money. So maybe. Although I think probably the diet of Diet Cokes and double cheeseburger and fries probably won't help. Maybe. So I think they probably could change it if they wanted to. There's not really much of a groundswell for it at the moment. But it's something I think about a lot, Michael. Donald Trump is going right now, hell for leather, 100 miles an hour. Why? Because the midterms are going to be in 20 months' time. And as soon as you've had those midterms, people will be talking about Trump's successor. And I think, we shouldn't just look at this as a 4-year presidency. It's effectively a 2-year presidency. Because that final 2 years, a large part of it is going to be who comes after Trump. It'll be a huge political story. And I think that will really anger and upset Trump because, he'll be in the autumn of his, or the winter, coming up to the winter, the final years of his, not just his political career, but also, in all probability, his life. And people will be talking about somebody else, and that will really upset him. So I can see why he would pivot into the possibility of a second successive term. But ultimately, I think age will come for him. It is important to say, Michael, the US Constitution can be amended. And there are many amendments. Mostly they're good amendments. And Trump supporters would say, well, this is another good amendment. And at the same time, let's try and zone out here and not be too hypocritical, Michael. We've had prime ministers in this country for a lot longer than 8 years. Okay? We had Margaret Thatcher from 79 to 90. We had John Major from 97 to 2007. So I think it would be a little bit hypocritical to say, oh my goodness, you're serving more than 8 years. That's not allowed. Well, that's precisely what we've done. Other countries, of course, have had prime ministers serve for a lot longer. I think the durability of the American Republic for a quarter of a millennium really goes hand in hand with the impossibility of a single individual accumulating sufficient power to serve more than 2 or 3 terms in the case of FDR. And clearly Trump represents something of a challenge to that. But, these things have happened. Amendments have happened. So I think it's plausible. And I do think, Michael, there is a ready-made replacement for him. Obviously, he hasn't got the same brand for now, but J.D. Vance does strike me as a really potent politician. I saw his Munich speech, actually. He was kind of umming and ahhing and wasn't a great orator. But he's only been in this game for, 5, 6, 7 years as a senator, as a person in public life. I think, by the end of his first term as a vice president, he'll be pretty well equipped to run for the top job, particularly after 2 terms. I mean, I think he would be really well equipped. He'd be 50, early 50s by then. A lot of experience under his belt. He's clearly doing a lot of work on the foreign policy side with Rubio as Secretary of State. So I do kind of feel like that movement has an heir apparent. I don't think it'd be somebody like Steve Bannon. I do think Vance is very, very well placed for it. The curveball is, of course, one of the Trump kids, Donald Jr. They are. Donald Jr. actually is a moderately competent person, but I can't really see it. So it would have to be Vance. But yeah, I don't think you can write off two successive terms, and that would need an amendment, but it's quite plausible. Otherwise, I think another option is they just gerrymander the system for another Republican to win who's not Vance, but they really, really gerrymander the system in a way that we've not really seen yet. And by the way, they already do that, right? It's much harder to vote in swing states as an African American than as a white American for reasons. It's to stop Democrats winning. It's to make it harder for Democrats to win. That already happens. They could put that on steroids, I guess.
I've got one more clip to show you. Obviously, the debate about whether Trump and the Trump administration is fascist comes up a lot. I'm kind of agnostic on the question because I think it's semantic, right? There are lots of people who argue that something is only fascism if it sort of arises, if it's an organized party with street violence and arises specifically sort of as a coalition between business elites and sort of the masses or sort of a mobilized mass to keep down an organized left. So you can only really have fascism when there is a threat of socialist revolution, right? So that's why you get it in the 30s. I'm agnostic. I don't have a strong opinion either way. But there have been a sort of few moments when I've looked at what Trump and Musk and his administration are doing where it just feels so fascist, it can't really be ignored. And this is the latest one. It's a video posted on the White House, the official White House Twitter account, shared with the caption, ASMR, Illegal Alien Deportation Flight. And I just find that, I started the show kind of talking about taboos, right? The Nazi taboo, which is that you sort of, that used to be an insult. And now you've got sort of political parties who are trying to normalize it, sort of trying to say, oh, well, maybe it was a Nazi salute, maybe it wasn't. It's no longer seen as something that no one would ever want to associate with. And I think this kind of breaks a similar taboo, which is, you shouldn't celebrate the lowest point of someone else's life, right? I don't actually think that any kind of deportation is outrageous. I think that you have to have controlled borders, and that's going to involve some deportations, especially of people who've broken the law, right? I'm not against all deportations, but I think the idea that you celebrate someone in their lowest moment is just obscene. And you might say, well, if you're fine with the policy, then who cares about the PR they do around it? I do think that the idea that you shouldn't celebrate misery actually does restrain policy to some degree. I talked about it on a previous show. I think there's Tom Holland talks about, I mean, he's a massive liberal. He talks about it in his book, where he's talking about sort of like this Nietzschean ideology, which was sort of the Nazi one, which was to say there are great men and we have to all sort of wallow in this sort of warlike greatness where we destroy people weaker than us, and which is very sort of anti-Christian, which is to say the last will be first. We should really respect people who are in more vulnerable positions, not celebrate their destruction. And I do think that there is this sort of Nietzschean Nazi celebrating in strength and celebrating in the destruction of the lives of people who are in a more vulnerable position, which I just think is really, really revolting. Aaron, I want to know what your response was to that video, again, from an official White House account.
Yeah, disgusting. I mean, there's a clear theatre of cruelty going on. And this is for a certain audience, and to show, look, we're really getting on top of this issue. That only goes so far, by the way. If you still see reports of things happening, which were happening before, drugs crossing through the border, or a homicide which happens to involve an undocumented person, etc., that only goes so far. PR only goes so far. I just want to read, you mentioned Christianity, Michael. This is from the Epistle of James. The book of James. Come now, you rich people, weep and wail for the miseries that are coming to you. Your riches have rotted and your clothes are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have rusted, and their rust will be evidence against you, and it will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure for the last days. The wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out. And the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous one who does not resist you. This sounds like Bernie Sanders. So, on steroids. So this idea that Christianity is somehow, aligned in terms of values, or the gospel at least, that's not the gospel, that's later on in the New Testament. But the idea that, let's say, the New Testament is aligned with what the Trump White House is doing, and this theatre of cruelty from people like Vance, etc., is just completely off. It's just completely off. And I think it goes back as well, Michael, to the conversation we're having in this country right now about woke. Is it, using the R word? That's not a result of woke, right? People were told not to use the R word when I was a kid growing up in the 90s. And you would have conservative teachers tell you that. Why? Because it's just bad manners. It's just rude. There but for the grace of God go I. That could be you in this situation which you're mocking, so don't do it. And I don't think that's like a left-right thing. That's just a civilized, sensible thing, or at least it wasn't until quite recently, Michael, that people with any sort of moral core whatsoever, they would comport themselves like that. And it is really interesting, like you say, to see the US right, the ruling faction of the US right, going this wacky Nietzschean. I think fundamentally, people say post-liberal. I also think weirdly post-Christian, because they don't see the possibility, the plausibility of a universal human subject, which of course, Christianity and Islam do see precisely that. They see an ethnic other who's there to be mocked, derided, and fundamentally presented as less than human. That is not an impulse from the New Testament. Of course, Christians have done very bad things in the past. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But certainly in modernity, when contemporary politicians have tried to mobilize rhetoric and trying to present themselves as upstanding figures of moral authority, you don't do that. Certainly in Britain, right? Centre-right Christian COE Tories do not do that. It's not the done thing. It's ungenteel. It's impolite. It's really unbecoming. And I think it's really right for you to highlight that the US right, the Republicans, Trumpism is going in this new, dangerous, right now quasi-fascist direction, because I think we have to have quite a clear definition of what fascism is. But this is absolutely the same key as fascism. Absolutely the same key. Absolutely the same thought architecture.
We've ended on religion again, which I think is always a nice way to end the week, isn't it? I'm still not a believer, but I'm still curious. Come back on Monday for another live show from 6 p.m. Until then, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.